Virginia Satir reveals the hidden truth behind sibling rivalry. The trauma begins at home. Have you ever felt like you had to compete for your parents' love? Not in words, maybe, not in direct actions, but in the silence, in the glances, in the way they praised one sibling's achievements and remained quiet when it was your turn, in how they noticed one child's strengths while unintentionally overlooking the efforts of the other. This kind of experience is far more common than people talk about, and it leaves scars that most don't even realize are there until they begin to look inward. This is not about jealousy between siblings. It's not about children being naturally competitive or envious. What we're talking about is something deeper, something rooted in the way love, recognition, and validation were distributed within the home or withheld. It's about a subtle emotional battlefield that forms in childhood when love starts to feel like a prize to be won. And that prize? The full attention, pride, and warmth of a parent. Sibling rivalry, in many cases, doesn't begin between the siblings. It begins in the invisible emotional habits of the parents. Sometimes it's in the innocent comments. "Why can't you be more like your sister? Your brother never gave me trouble like this. She's always been the responsible one. He's the athlete in the family." These words might not come from a place of harm, but they plant seeds. Seeds of comparison, seeds of doubt, seeds of competition. As children, we are constantly scanning the environment for one thing: love, acceptance, safety. When love feels limited, children will do anything to secure their share of it. And if that means being better than their sibling in order to feel seen, they'll do it, quietly, painfully, and with a growing sense that love must be earned, not simply given. Virginia Satir, one of the pioneers of family therapy, believed that every human being is born with a deep longing to be validated, acknowledged, and embraced for who they are. Not in comparison to anyone else, not as a version of someone else, but as a unique and whole self. When that need is met with competition, something fractures inside. Imagine growing up believing that love is a contest, that affection is conditional, that attention is reserved for those who perform, achieve, or behave better. This emotional framework doesn't vanish with age. It shapes adulthood. It shows up in how we relate to others, how we pursue success, and most painfully, how we see ourselves. Adults who grew up in environments like this often carry a quiet voice inside that whispers, "You're not enough," or "You need to prove your worth." Even in moments of success, they may struggle to feel truly proud of themselves. Why? Because for years, they were chasing something that should have been freely given: love without comparison. Sometimes, that same competition continues into adulthood. Siblings who were compared as children may remain emotionally distant, holding on to resentments they can't fully name. Underneath the tension, there is often sadness, grief over a bond that never had the chance to bloom without the shadow of rivalry. And let's be clear, this is not about blaming parents. Most parents repeat the patterns they themselves inherited. Many don't realize the impact of their words or the power of their approval. They may have also been raised in homes where love was a reward, not a right, where being the good child meant survival. But recognizing this pattern is the first step in breaking it. Because when we name what was never named, we begin to heal what was never healed. The truth is, love should never be a contest. No child should feel like they must outperform a sibling to earn affection. No one should carry into adulthood the weight of being less than or second best. If this speaks to something inside you, if you've ever felt that silent competition, you're not alone. It's not your fault. You were doing the best you could in an environment that made you believe love was something to be won. But here's the good news. What was once taught can be unlearned. What was once missing can be reclaimed, starting with self-compassion. When we stop comparing ourselves, when we choose to see our own value without needing to surpass anyone else, we begin to rewrite the script. You were never meant to be in competition. You were meant to be loved, simply for being who you are. That truth may have been buried for a long time, but it's still there. And today, maybe for the first time, you can begin to believe it. Because real healing doesn't begin when the past is perfect. It begins when we choose to see ourselves, finally, as enough. Enough without comparison. Enough without performance. Enough without rivalry. Enough just as we are. The invisible start. Small comparisons, deep wounds. They say words don't hurt, but when you're a child, they do. Especially when they're subtle. Especially when they come from the people whose approval means everything. No one forgets the first time they were compared to someone they loved. A a sibling, a cousin, a classmate. That moment when something inside shifted, when you no longer looked at yourself as you, but as less than them. The pain didn't come from the compliment the other received. It came from what was missing in what you received. Sometimes it's not even about what was said. It's about what wasn't said. It's about being the one who never heard, "I'm proud of you." It's about standing next to your sibling while they shine and wondering if you're invisible. And when that happens over and over again, something begins to take root. The belief that you are not enough. Virginia Satir taught that every person holds a deep internal image of themselves, shaped by the messages they receive growing up. And if those messages are filled with comparison, silence, or conditional praise, that image becomes distorted. Not because you were flawed, but because the mirror you were looking into was broken. Children are incredibly sensitive to nuance. You don't have to say you're not good enough out loud. They'll hear it anyway in the way you hesitate before praising them, in the way your eyes light up more for one child's achievement than the other's effort, in the way one sibling's story is told with pride and the other's is quietly skipped. It begins small. You know your brother always gets straight A's. Your sister was already walking at this age. I never had this kind of trouble with your older sibling. Let your sister help you. She's better at that. To the adult, it's harmless, even helpful, maybe even true. But to the child, those words become the seeds of shame. Shame that says, they're better. Shame that says, you'll never measure up. Shame that says, you're only lovable if you become someone else. It's a painful lesson to learn at 5, at 10, at 15, that love and approval come with conditions. And those conditions often involve not being yourself, but being more like someone else. This creates children who try desperately to please. Children who become perfectionists. Children who hide parts of themselves to fit into the mold that earns praise. And later, adults who don't know who they really are, only who they were expected to become. There's another side to this story too. Sometimes the child who is always praised doesn't feel seen either. They become trapped in a performance they didn't choose. They feel pressure to always succeed, to never fail, to keep earning the identity they were given. They were labeled the smart one, the responsible one, the talented one. And that label became a prison, because any sign of struggle felt like failure. Any imperfection felt like losing love. Any moment of vulnerability felt like a threat. So while one sibling quietly suffers from invisibility, the other may suffer from the weight of constant expectation. Both are hurting, just in different ways. And in all of this, something precious is lost. The chance for siblings to grow together in safety, in support, and in solidarity. Instead of seeing each other as allies, they begin to view each other through the lens of comparison. They don't blame the parents. They often don't even realize what's happening. But the bond begins to break. Because when love is limited, siblings become competitors. When validation is unequal, trust becomes fragile. And when parents unconsciously divide, children stop sharing their hearts with one another. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Most parents don't mean to create competition. They love all their children. But love isn't just a feeling. It's how it's expressed, how it's distributed, and how it's reinforced. The deepest wounds in families are often the quietest. The ones that were never talked about. The ones that sound like, it wasn't that bad. The ones that leave a child wondering for decades if they were just being dramatic. But you're not being dramatic. You're remembering truth. You're remembering how deeply it hurt to always be compared. You're remembering how confusing it was to feel unseen. You're remembering how lonely it felt to watch love being handed out in measures. And today, you get to name that pain. Because pain that is named can be healed. Patterns that are seen can be broken. And relationships that were wounded can be rebuilt. Slowly, gently, honestly. You are not the comparison. You are not the mistake. You are not the shadow of someone else's light. You are you. And that is not only enough, it is irreplaceable. So if your story began with comparison, let it continue with compassion. For the child you were, for the adult you've become, and maybe, one day, for the sibling who also carries wounds they never knew how to explain. Because behind most rivalries, there are hearts longing to be heard. When you're a child, you don't just want love, you need it. And when that love seems uncertain, inconsistent, or conditional, you learn quickly how to earn it. You start performing, not on a stage, but in life. You become the helpful one, the quiet one, the funny one, the overachiever, the problem solver, the peacemaker, the strong one who never complains, or maybe the rebellious one, because negative attention is still attention. All of this, deep down, for the same reason, to feel seen, to feel worthy, to feel loved. When comparison enters a family dynamic, It often teaches children a dangerous equation: love, performance. Virginia Satir believed that every child has an innate right to feel accepted exactly as they are. But in families where comparisons dominate, that right is often replaced with roles, expectations, and silent contracts. You become the one who gets it right, or the one who always causes trouble, or the emotional one, or the responsible one. And you stay in that role, not because you want to, but because you think it's the only way to stay connected. It becomes a game, not one you chose to play, but one you believe you must win. Children in this emotional setup begin to scan constantly for cues. What made my parents smile when I did that? What got me the hug yesterday? What made them proud of my sibling? And can I do that too? It's exhausting, and it's not just exhausting in childhood. That exhaustion often follows us into adulthood. You might find yourself still performing, at work, in relationships, in social settings, always scanning, adjusting, trying to be good enough. You become a master of what others want, but a stranger to your own needs. The approval game is never really about success. It's about survival, because when love is tied to achievement, failure feels like rejection. And when love is tied to image, authenticity feels like danger. So you hide, you hustle, you overthink, you shrink your emotions to avoid being too much or too needy. You become excellent at being whatever version of you kept the peace in your childhood home. But inside, you may feel lost, tired, disconnected from who you really are, because the self you built wasn't chosen. It was shaped to fit someone else's comfort zone. And here's something most people never hear. That version of you did a beautiful job keeping you safe, but you don't have to keep playing the role forever. The need for approval, when rooted in comparison and conditional love, becomes a trap. And the trap is this: even when you win the game, it doesn't feel like enough. You might get the job, the degree, the applause, and still feel hollow, still feel like you're trying to prove something. Because deep down, your heart doesn't want admiration. It wants acceptance. It wants to be loved, not for being impressive, but for simply being. Sibling dynamics often reinforce these roles. Maybe you were the one who always had to be strong because your sibling was the fragile one. Or maybe you were the difficult one, always compared to your sibling who seemed to do everything right. Over time, you start to believe the role is your identity, but it's not. Virginia Satir once said, "We must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us. The roles we were assigned are not the truth of who we are. They were survival strategies, adaptations, scripts written in homes where love came with rules. And just like a script, you have the right to put it down and write something new. But to do that, you have to stop playing the game. Stop trying to win approval through comparison. Stop measuring your worth against someone else's success. Stop assuming that love must be earned through doing more, being more, proving more. You don't have to win love. You were meant to receive it. Unconditional love isn't about what you do. It's about being fully seen, with your strengths, your flaws, your fears, and your softness, and still being embraced. That's what every child deserved. That's what every adult is still looking for. And the first place it needs to come from is you. You don't need to compete. You don't need to outperform anyone. You don't need to be perfect to be enough. Your worth isn't a scoreboard. It's a truth that's been buried under years of comparison and performance, but it's still there. So maybe today is the day you pause, you breathe, you take off the mask, you stop the performance, and you say to yourself, I am allowed to be who I am. I don't need to earn love by pretending. I don't need to fight for what should be freely given. The game ends when you choose yourself. Not the version they preferred, not the version that got praised, but the real you, imperfect, growing, and worthy of love. The cost of favoritism, conditional love, and silent resentments. Some wounds are loud, others are quiet. Favoritism is one of those quiet wounds. It doesn't always come from abuse, shouting, or violence. Sometimes it comes in the form of a smile that isn't meant for you, a hug given more to one child, a proud story told at the dinner table, always about the same sibling, and silence when it's your turn. When favoritism enters a home, even if it's unintentional, it begins to shape the emotional landscape of every person in it. Because children don't just notice love, they notice who gets more of it. They notice who gets praised more, forgiven faster, protected more fiercely. Even if the parent doesn't realize it, the child does. And in many families, this favoritism isn't obvious. It's not declared. It's felt in the small moments, in the unequal attention, in the body language, in the way one child gets the benefit of the doubt and the other gets the burden of expectations. And when this happens over time, both children suffer. The favored child might seem like they have it all, more praise, more affection, more space to be human, but they often carry a secret pressure, the need to maintain the image, to never disappoint, to always succeed. They become the golden child, but the golden child is also trapped. They are rarely allowed to be vulnerable. They fear failure deeply. They often feel isolated, even envied, but rarely understood. Meanwhile, the forgotten child, the one constantly compared, lives with a different kind of weight, invisibility, shame, a quiet voice that says, "You're not what they wanted," or worse, "You were never enough to begin with." Virginia Satir emphasized that all human beings need to feel significant, loved, and accepted, not for being better than someone else, but simply for being themselves. Favoritism violates that need. It teaches children that love has a ranking, that they must earn their place in the emotional hierarchy of the family, and so resentment grows, but not just toward the parents, often toward each other. The siblings begin to see each other not as allies, but as threats, not as companions, but as competitors, and the pain becomes silent, rarely talked about, rarely confronted. Because admitting it would mean saying something that feels too dangerous. "That hurt me. I felt left out. I wanted to be loved the way you were." So they grow up apart, not always physically, but emotionally. They might laugh together, celebrate birthdays, attend family events, but underneath, there's a quiet wall built from years of comparisons and unmet needs. The irony? Both are hurting. The favorite child might secretly wish to be loved for who they really are, not the role they had to play. The overlooked child might carry years of grief for the affection they didn't receive, but neither knows how to say it, because no one taught them that it was okay to talk about these things. No one taught them that their pain was valid, even if it wasn't visible. And when pain isn't validated, it becomes shame. And when shame builds up, it turns into resentment. Resentment that poisons the relationship, not just with the sibling, but with themselves. Many adults who grew up in this dynamic struggle with inner conflict. They want to love their family, but part of them feels distant. They want to let go of the past, but part of them still aches. They want to feel close to their sibling, but something always feels off, and they don't always know why. But today, maybe you do. Maybe you're starting to see that the wound wasn't about one moment. It was about the repetition, the pattern, the long-term feeling of being second place in a race you never signed up for. And this is not about blaming the parents. Most did the best they could with what they had. But doing our best doesn't always mean we did no harm. And healing doesn't require blame. It requires truth. The truth that favoritism, even unintentional, creates emotional distance. That conditional love leaves scars. That when one child is elevated, the others often feel diminished. Even if no one meant to hurt them, you're allowed to feel what you feel. You're allowed to name what was unfair. You're allowed to grieve what you didn't receive, because naming it doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. And honesty is where healing begins. So, if you grew up feeling like the shadow of someone else's light, you are not alone. If you were the one who had to shine just to stay safe, you are not alone. Both roles were responses to the same hunger, the desire to be seen, loved, and valued for who you truly are. And today, you can begin to give yourself that love, not because you won some competition, not because you proved yourself, but because you exist. That's it. That's enough. Let that be the beginning of something new. The emotional distance between siblings. The same roof, the same parents, the same holidays, family dinners, and bedtime routines. But they didn't always share love. At least, not in the way they both needed. Because somewhere along the way, the bond between siblings began to stretch and then to tear. Not with fights, not with drama. Sometimes, not even with words, but with silence. The kind of silence that forms when one child grows up feeling less than, and the other never notices. Or worse, feels guilty and doesn't know why. This is how emotional distance begins. Not because siblings don't care, but because they were set up to see each other as obstacles, not as allies. When comparison enters the family, connection suffers. When favoritism takes root, trust weakens. When one child feels they have to compete, it's hard to feel safe being close. Over time, that emotional distance becomes the new normal. You smile at each other. You talk about surface things. Maybe you even feel nostalgic about the past. But deep down, you know there are parts of your heart that will never come up in conversation because it feels safer that way. Safer to pretend that nothing was ever wrong. Safer to leave the old feelings buried. Safer to move on than to reopen what still hurts. But even in that distance, something lingers. The quiet question, could we have been close if things had been different? Virginia Satir often said that families are systems, and when one part of the system is unbalanced, Everyone feels it. No one escapes the ripple effects, not even the child who appeared to have it all. Siblings in these systems are often shaped into roles they didn't choose. One becomes the achiever, the golden child, the pride. The other becomes the invisible one, the rebel, the disappointment. Each child adapts, each child survives, but neither child wins, because what they lose is each other. The chance to be a team, to have a safe place in one another, to grow up side by side, not miles apart in silent comparison. Instead, there's mistrust. One sibling might think, they always thought they were better than me. The other might think, I never asked to be the favorite. Both are right. Both are hurting, but rarely do they say it. Why? Because there's no script for this conversation. No family gathering ever starts with, let's talk about how we were emotionally distanced as children. So it continues. The surface politeness, the small talk, the carefully guarded relationship. But underneath, there's grief. Grief for the bond that could have been. Grief for the childhood that didn't allow safety, only survival. Grief for the moments that were lost in the name of competition. And sometimes, hope. Hope that it's not too late. Because the truth is, emotional distance can be bridged. But it starts with honesty, with humility, with one person willing to say, I want to understand what happened between us. I've carried some feelings I never knew how to express. I don't want to stay strangers. These conversations aren't easy. They may not happen all at once, but the possibility begins the moment one heart reaches for another, not with blame, but with curiosity, not with accusation, but with vulnerability. Because maybe the sibling you resented also resented you. Maybe the one you thought was privileged actually felt pressured. Maybe the one who seemed cold was simply trying to protect themselves. No one comes out of childhood untouched. We all carry something, and the ones who grew up beside us, they carry things too. Sometimes, when we're brave enough to talk, we realize we were on the same side all along, just wearing different armor. And even if the other person isn't ready, you can still let go of the story that says, we were enemies. You can still grieve what you lost and free yourself from carrying it forward. Because the rivalry wasn't your choice. The distance wasn't your failure. But the healing, that can begin with you. You don't have to stay in that role. You don't have to pretend the silence doesn't hurt. You don't have to keep your heart guarded forever. Sometimes the bridge back is built not with answers, but with presence, with listening, with courage, with truth. And sometimes healing a sibling bond doesn't mean becoming best friends. It means finding peace, letting go of comparison, and remembering that behind every role, there was just a child trying to be loved. The inner voice of comparison. You no longer live in the same house. You're not competing for the same chair at the table. You've grown, you've changed. But the comparison is still there, not outside, inside. You hear it when someone else succeeds. You feel it when you fall short, even by your own standards. You sense it when you make a mistake, and that small, cruel voice whispers, see, you were never enough. This is the legacy of childhood comparison, an inner voice that keeps the old game alive long after the players have left the room. Virginia Satir taught that the way we experience ourselves is shaped by the environment we grew up in. If we were praised for outperforming others, we may believe our worth is tied to always being better. If we were criticized in comparison to others, we may believe we'll never be good enough. In both cases, that belief becomes a voice, and that voice follows us everywhere. It shows up in subtle ways. When you scroll through someone's achievements and feel small, when you enter a room and immediately measure how you compare, when you hold back from pursuing something you love because part of you says you're not as good as them. It's not always loud. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it even sounds like motivation, but it's rooted in fear. The fear of not being enough, the fear of being overlooked, the fear that if you don't measure up, you won't be loved. This is not vanity. This is survival. It started when you were a child who just wanted to be seen. And now it's a habit, an internal reflex of self-measurement. Am I doing better than them? Did they notice me? Am I as smart, as pretty, as valuable? It's exhausting because no matter how much you do, the bar keeps moving. There's always someone doing more. There's always another reason to feel behind. And so the voice keeps whispering, not yet, not enough, almost there, but not quite. You live in a constant race, but no one else is running. Because the only person you're trying to outrun is the version of you that was never accepted as she was. That's what comparison does. It turns your own mind into a courtroom. Every action is judged, every mistake is magnified, and every success feels temporary because the voice is never satisfied. That voice doesn't belong to you. It was built by years of being measured, by being told, directly or indirectly, that you were only worthy if you matched or exceeded someone else. It came from being praised only in comparison, or ignored in comparison. But you don't have to keep listening. You can begin to unlearn it, because that voice is not truth. It's trauma. It's the echo of someone else's fear, someone else's pain, someone else's blueprint for love, passed on to you. And now, you get to rewrite it. It won't happen overnight. The voice is familiar, but over time, with intention, it can get quieter. You begin by noticing it, by saying, "That's not my voice, that's something I learned." You interrupt the sentence, you breathe, you speak something different. Instead of, "I'll never be as good as her," you say, "Her success doesn't threaten mine." Instead of, "They always do it better," you say, "I'm growing in my own way." Instead of, "I have to be the best to be worthy," you say, "I'm already worthy, even in the middle of the process." This isn't toxic positivity. This is reclaiming your mind from patterns that were never yours to begin with. You didn't choose to be compared. You didn't ask for love to be conditional. But you can choose to love yourself differently now. And the more you do, the quieter that old voice becomes. The more you see yourself through eyes of compassion, the less power shame has. The more you celebrate others without shrinking, the more space you make for your own light. There's room for everyone. You don't have to fight for space anymore. You never needed to. You were always enough, not in comparison to anyone, just as you are. The root of the problem: parents who were never seen. It's easy to think the pain started with you. The comparison, the favoritism, the emotional distance, the voice inside that never lets you rest. But if you look deeper, beneath the surface of your own story, you may start to see something else. This didn't begin with you. It began with them, your parents. Not as villains, not as monsters, but as children who once sat in your exact same place, longing to be seen, to be heard, to be loved without conditions. Virginia Satir often said, "Parents teach best what they've learned worst." And what many of our parents learned worst was how to love unconditionally. They were raised in homes where love was earned, not given, where emotion was weakness, where comparison was motivation, where silence was safety. So they grew up not knowing how to validate feelings, even their own. They didn't learn how to affirm uniqueness because they were taught to conform. They didn't know how to speak love in ways that healed because they were raised in environments where love was performance, obedience, or survival. And then they became parents, still carrying the wounds, still hearing the same inner voices, still trying to be good enough for people who are no longer even alive. They brought those wounds into the home, not because they were cruel, but because pain unhealed becomes pain repeated. They didn't set out to compare you to your sibling. They didn't mean to make you feel second. But that's what happens when you raise a child from a place of emotional hunger, not wholeness. They gave what they had, and sometimes what they had was broken. That doesn't make the hurt any less real. It doesn't erase the impact of the words they said or didn't say. But it helps us see that the root of the problem is generational. It's not just a you issue. It's a cycle of emotional scarcity, a cycle of inherited fear, a cycle of conditional love. And cycles can be broken, but only when we name them. Because when you stop seeing your parents as perfect or as the enemy and start seeing them as humans shaped by their own painful histories, something shifts. You feel grief, you feel compassion, you feel anger, you feel understanding, all at once. And that's okay. You don't need to choose just one. You can hold both truths. They hurt me, and they were hurting too. This is not about excusing emotional neglect. It's not about pretending it didn't matter. It did. It still does. But it's about understanding where it came from, so you don't carry it forward. Because if we don't look back with clarity, we end up repeating what we tried so hard to escape. Many people become adults swearing they'll be different. But without healing the root, they unknowingly recreate the same conditions. They compare. They withhold affection. They reward performance. They silence emotion. Not because they want to, but because it's what feels familiar. This is why awareness is power. When you see the truth, you reclaim your ability to choose differently. You begin to understand, my parents weren't bad, they were broken. And then you ask, what do I want to pass on? And what ends with me? You get to end the cycle. You get to be the first to say, I will not use comparison as a tool. I will not make love conditional. I will not silence the people I love when they feel. But before you give that to others, you must give it to yourself. Because healing doesn't begin with your children. It begins with the child inside you, the one who wasn't seen, the one who didn't know how to compete, the one who just wanted to be loved as they were. Go back to that child. Listen to them. Hold them. Say the words no one ever said. You didn't need to earn it. You You were enough from the beginning, and from that place, not of anger, but of truth, you begin again. Not to fix the past, but to honor it, to learn from it, to grow beyond it, because you are not just the product of your childhood. You are the author of what comes next. Breaking the cycle. Siblings are not rivals. They were never your enemy. Not really. Not when you were 5. Not when you were 15. Not even now, when you're both adults with lives that barely cross paths. But something in your story made it feel like they were. Maybe it was the comparisons. Maybe it was the competition for attention. Maybe it was the way love felt like a limited resource, and only one of you seemed to receive it at a time. Whatever it was, it planted a lie. The lie that to be seen, you had to outshine. That to be safe, you had to keep your guard up. That to be loved, you had to be better than them. This is how siblings become strangers, how connection turns into quiet resentment, how childhood rivalry hardens into adult distance. But it doesn't have to stay that way, because siblings are not rivals. They were never meant to be. They were meant to be companions, witnesses to the same beginning, people who carry pieces of the same story, even if they remember it differently. Virginia Satir believed that healing happens when we move from survival to connection, when we stop acting out of fear and start relating from truth. And the truth is this: the real problem was never your sibling. It was the system, a family system that encouraged comparison instead of collaboration, that handed out love unevenly, not because it was intentional, but because it was inherited. That made you believe your value depended on outperforming the person who was supposed to stand beside you. But the moment you see that truth, not just intellectually, but in your heart, the cycle begins to crack. You stop seeing your sibling as the person who had it better or got in your way, and you start seeing them as someone who was also surviving. Maybe they were favored, but maybe they never felt free. Maybe they were blamed, but maybe they never felt safe. Maybe you were both just two kids trying to feel enough, and maybe you still are. Breaking the cycle doesn't always mean having a dramatic reunion or a deep conversation. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a shift in how you think, with letting go of the need to compete, with stopping yourself when that old voice says, they're still ahead of you, with releasing the fantasy that if they had just been different, you would have been happy. Because the truth is, your healing is not in their hands, it's in yours. And when you let go of the old script, something new becomes possible. You can begin to relate, not from the roles you were assigned, but from the people you've become. You can be curious instead of defensive. You can offer empathy instead of comparison. Even if they don't meet you halfway, you've still stepped out of the old pattern. You've chosen connection over competition, understanding over blame, healing over history. And if the opportunity arises, if your sibling is open, you can talk. Not to rehash the past, but to acknowledge the unspoken. You might say, I used to feel like I had to fight for love in our family. I wish we had been closer, but I see now we were both hurting. I'm trying to let go of the old story, and I'd like to know you better now. These conversations are tender. They may not go how you hope, but they are seeds, and seeds take time. Even if the other person isn't ready to talk, the act of letting go, of dropping the rivalry, frees you, because you're no longer fighting a battle that was never yours to begin with. You are no longer trying to win. You are choosing peace, and that is powerful. You are breaking the cycle that says love must be earned, the cycle that says only one can succeed, the cycle that says your story is forever stuck in the shape of the past. You are writing something new. And in that new story, siblings are not enemies. They are humans. They are mirrors. They are part of your roots, not your prison. So whether you reconnect or simply forgive from afar, know this: you are not repeating what was done to you. You are doing something brave, something rare, something healing. You are choosing to see differently, to feel differently, to live differently, and that changes everything. Healing begins with you. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize something hard, but liberating. They may never apologize. They may never understand. They may never change. And even so, you can begin to heal, because healing doesn't depend on someone else finally giving you what they couldn't back then. It begins the moment you decide to give to yourself what was missing: the love, the approval, the voice that says, you're enough. It begins with you. Virginia Satir believed that change happens not when we try to fix others, but when we begin to truly see and care for ourselves. That starts with a simple but life-altering shift. No longer treating yourself the way they treated you. No more harsh comparisons in your mind. No more performing just to be worthy. No more punishing yourself for the roles you had to play to survive. You did the best you could in an emotional environment that asked too much and gave too little. You were just a child, and that child deserves compassion, not judgment. So go back, not to live in the past, but to meet that younger version of yourself with new eyes. See her sitting quietly in her room, wondering why she always felt a little behind, why her efforts never seemed to sparkle the way her siblings did, why she had to try so hard just to feel like she belonged. Go to her, in your heart, in your imagination, and sit beside her. No advice, no corrections, just presence, and maybe whisper what no one ever said. It wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't need to be more like anyone else. You were always enough. This is how healing begins. Not in big dramatic moments, but in the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself. Every time you choose rest instead of overachievement. Every time you speak kindly to yourself after a mistake. Every time you celebrate your progress instead of comparing it. You're healing. You're breaking the pattern. And over time, that old inner voice, the one that was born from competition and fear, starts to lose its grip. It gets quieter, weaker, until one day you catch yourself thinking something new. I don't have to be better. I just have to be me. That's the moment you know you're growing. Because healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before the world told you that wasn't enough. Before the comparisons, before the roles, before the rivalry. That person is still there, waiting, patient, resilient. And yes, there may still be grief. Grief for the closeness you didn't have with your sibling. Grief for the warmth you didn't feel from your parents. Grief for the version of childhood you wish had existed. Let yourself feel it. Grief isn't weakness. It's the evidence that you're finally honoring what mattered. You wanted love, you deserved love, and it's okay to mourn what wasn't. But from that morning, something sacred begins. Acceptance. You stop trying to rewrite the past. You stop waiting for someone else to undo it. And you step into your own power. The power to nurture, to restore, to protect your own heart. You become the source of what was missing. You parent yourself. You affirm yourself. You hold space for your feelings, without comparison, without conditions. And when that becomes your new normal, something shifts in how you live. You stop rushing to prove yourself. You stop chasing recognition. You stop fearing failure because you've made peace with the truth. Your worth was never up for debate. It always was. It always will be. And now that you know that, you're free. The love you deserved can still be born. You may never hear the words you longed for as a child. You may never receive the apology that would validate your pain. You may never have the version of family you imagined in your quietest hopes. But none of that means you are doomed to live without love, because the love you didn't receive can still be born. Not in the past, not in the old stories, but right here, right now, in you. Virginia Satir taught that every human being has the capacity to nurture themselves, to become, in adulthood, the healing presence they never had in childhood. That may sound strange, unfair even. You might think, why should I be the one to rebuild what they broke? But here's the truth. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you, because your soul was not created to live in the shadow of emotional hunger. It was created to receive, to give, and to be love. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to be better than anyone. That doesn't compare your worth to another's. That doesn't vanish when you fail. That simply says, you are enough, always. That love, the real kind, the healing kind, may not have come from your family of origin, but it can be cultivated in the family you create, in the friendships you nurture, in the community you choose, and most of all, in the relationship you have with yourself. Because the love that transforms isn't the love that was withheld. It's the love you choose to build afterward. The love that listens to your story without minimizing it. The love that embraces you when you cry over things that happened years ago. The love that lets you rest without guilt. The love that says, I see you, I believe you, you matter. And yes, it can begin quietly, in a walk you take just to be with yourself, in a moment where you say no, not because you're selfish, but because you've finally learned to honor your needs, in a boundary you set without apologizing, in a choice to speak kindly to the parts of you that were once judged and silenced. That's what it means to let new love be born. It's not about fixing the old wound with the same people who caused it. It's about no longer letting that wound define how you see yourself. It's about choosing connection over isolation, self-respect over self-blame, truth over performance. And when you do that, something opens inside. You begin to feel joy without guilt, peace without pressure, love without competition. You begin to trust your own presence, your own voice, your own enoughness. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to forgive, not because they asked, and not because it erases the pain, but because you no longer want to carry it. You no longer need to keep the door open for someone who never walked through. You no longer need to convince anyone that your pain was real. You know it was, and you are finally safe enough to let it go. That's what healing does. It doesn't rewrite the past, it reclaims your future. So if no one told you today, you are lovable, you are worthy, you are not too much, you are not a mistake, you are a whole person, capable of deep joy, capable of connection, capable of giving and receiving love in ways your past never taught you, but your soul always knew were possible. The love you didn't receive from them is not lost. It is waiting to be created by you, and that love will not be a performance. It will be truth. It will be freedom. It will be home.